My name's Melly, and I guess you could say my life turned upside down when I met Alex. We clicked instantly at the accounting firm where we both worked, and before I knew it, we were planning a wedding. I was over the moon, of course, but meeting his family, that was a whole different ballgame. Alex always talked about his mom, Mrs. Donovan, with such admiration. So, the day we were supposed to meet her for dinner, I was a bundle of nerves, smoothing down my simple blue dress and double-checking my reflection for the umpteenth time. "Relax, Melly, she's going to love you," Alex assured me as we drove to his childhood home. But the moment we walked through the door, Mrs. Donovan's eyes narrowed as she looked me up and down. "Well, you're certainly slender, aren't you?" she remarked, her tone cool. I tried to laugh it off. "I guess I am. Never been much of an eater." Mrs. Donovan hummed, her expression unreadable. "I hope you're taking care of yourself. A woman should have some robustness, you know." Alex, bless him, jumped in. "Mom, Melly's just fine. She's healthy." Dinner was an uncomfortable affair. Mrs. Donovan's eyes were constantly on me, making me squirm every time I took a bite. I could feel her judging my every move. The worst part came when I excused myself to the restroom. As I passed the living room, I overheard Mrs. Donovan whispering to her sister, "She looks sickly. How will she bear Alex's healthy children?" I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. The rest of the evening was a blur. I barely touched my food and struggled to keep a smile plastered on my face. On the drive back, I was quiet, the words echoing in my mind. Alex noticed. "Hey, you okay? You've been quiet since dinner." I sighed. "It's nothing. Just tired, I guess." But inside, I was reeling. Mrs. Donovan's words had cut deeper than I wanted to admit. I wondered if this was just the beginning of a long road of judgment and disapproval. Little did I know, it was only the tip of the iceberg. As the days turned into weeks, the dinners at Mrs. Donovan's became a regular ordeal. Each invitation felt like a summons, each meal a trial. Alex, ever the optimist, kept reassuring me that things would get better, but they only seemed to worsen. One particular evening stands out in my memory. We arrived at Mrs. Donovan's to find an even more extravagant spread than usual. The dining table was overflowing with dishes, rich gravies, fatty roasts, and sides heavy with butter and cream. As soon as we sat down, Mrs. Donovan was on the offensive. "Melly, you look even thinner than last time. You really should eat more," she said, piling my plate high with food. I tried to protest. "Oh, Mrs. Donovan, this is too much. I really can't." "Nonsense," she cut me off. "You need to build some strength, dear. Especially if you and Alex are planning a family." I forced a smile and took a bite. Mrs. Donovan's eyes flickered with something like triumph. I glanced at Alex, hoping for some support, but he just shrugged apologetically. I felt my stomach knot up, not just from the rich food, but from the undercurrent of criticism in her words. Dinner progressed with painful slowness. Mrs. Donovan kept pushing more food my way, commenting on every bite I took, or didn't take. "You know, Melly, a good wife should know how to cook hearty meals. It's important for a family." I felt a sting at her words. "I do cook, Mrs. Donovan, but I prefer healthier options." She scoffed. "Healthy is fine, but this," she gestured at my barely touched plate, "is just pickiness. You're setting a bad example." By the end of the meal, I was both nauseous and seething with anger. The drive home was tense. I couldn't hold back anymore. "Alex, your mom's comments are really hurtful. It's like she's constantly judging me." Alex was silent for a moment before responding. "I know, Melly. I'll talk to her, okay? I'm sure she doesn't mean it the way it sounds." But a part of me doubted that anything would change. Mrs. Donovan had made her feelings clear, and no amount of talking seemed to soften her stance. Each subsequent dinner only reinforced my feelings of inadequacy. Mrs. Donovan's remarks became more pointed, her scrutiny more intense. "Melly, are you avoiding my food deliberately? You barely eat anything I make." I tried to explain. "It's not that, Mrs. Donovan. Your food is very rich, and it doesn't always agree with me." She tutted disapprovingly. "A little discomfort is nothing. You need to eat more, put on some weight. It's not healthy to be so thin." Her words echoed in my head long after each dinner, amplifying my insecurities and doubts. The thought of facing another meal at her house filled me with dread. My relationship with Alex was strong, but the shadow of his mother's disapproval loomed over us, a constant, unsettling presence. As I lay awake many nights, I wondered how long I could endure this. The discomfort in my stomach after each meal was a stark reminder of the growing discomfort in my heart. I felt like an outsider, unwelcome and misunderstood, and I couldn't help but worry about the future of our relationship under the weight of his mother's judgment. As the days rolled into weeks, my unease around Mrs. Donovan turned into outright dread. The constant scrutiny, the endless comments about my weight and eating habits, it was all becoming too much. So I made a decision, one that I knew wouldn't sit well with her. I started avoiding meals at her house. The next time Alex mentioned going over for dinner, I hesitated before speaking up. "Alex, I don't think I can go tonight." He looked surprised. "Why not? Mom's making that roast you liked." I took a deep breath. "It's not about the food. It's... Your mom makes me uncomfortable. I can't keep pretending it's okay." Alex's face fell. "Melly, she's just trying to be caring in her own way. She doesn't mean to upset you." I shook my head, frustration building up. "It's not caring, Alex. It feels like she's attacking me, always commenting on how I look, what I eat. I can't deal with it anymore." We left it at that, but I could tell Alex was torn. He wanted to keep the peace, but I needed him to understand my side. The next family dinner I missed set off a real storm. Mrs. Donovan called me the next day, her voice icy. "Melly, I noticed you didn't grace us with your presence last night. Is everything all right?" I tried to keep my tone neutral. "Yes, Mrs. Donovan, I just wasn't feeling up to it." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Not feeling up to it? You do realize it's rude to decline family dinners without a good reason. You're part of this family now, or so I thought." Her words stung, and I felt my patience snap. "With all due respect, Mrs. Donovan, being part of this family shouldn't mean I have to endure being criticized all the time." There was a moment of stunned silence before she retorted, "Criticism? I'm merely concerned about your health, Melly. A wife should be strong, healthy. I'm worried you're not suitable for Alex." That hit a nerve. "Suitable? I love Alex and he loves me. That's what matters, not your opinion on my health." The conversation ended soon after, but the damage was done. The rift between us grew wider, deeper. Alex tried to mediate, but his attempts only made things worse. One evening, as we sat quietly in our living room, he broached the subject. "Melly, I spoke to Mom. She's really upset. She thinks you're avoiding her." I let out a bitter laugh. "Avoiding her? She's been nothing but harsh and judgmental since day one. What does she expect?" Alex ran a hand through his hair, looking exasperated. "She's my mom, Melly. I can't just ignore her. Can't you two try to work things out?" I looked at him, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. "Alex, it's not about working things out, it's about respect. She doesn't respect me, and I don't know if I can keep pretending it doesn't hurt." The wedding day was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, and it was, at least until the reception. Everything was perfect. The ceremony, the vows, Alex looking at me like I was the only one in the room. But then, at the reception, everything changed. I remember holding a glass of wine, the same wine everyone else was drinking. It tasted a bit off, but I figured it was just nerves. I took a sip, and that's the last thing I remember before waking up in a stark, white hospital room. Confused and groggy, I tried to sit up. That's when I heard them, Alex and his mom, just outside my room. Mrs. Donovan's voice was sharp. "See what I mean, Alex? She can't even handle a simple toast. She's too weak, too fragile for our family." I felt a pang of hurt, but I was too weak to respond. Alex's voice, full of worry, cut through. "Mom, stop it. This isn't the time. We don't even know what happened." I wanted to shout, to tell them I was okay, that I wasn't weak, but my voice was a mere whisper. Then the door opened, and a doctor walked in, a serious look on his face. "Mrs. Donovan," he said, addressing me, "you gave us quite a scare. We found traces of a sedative in your system. Did you take anything before the ceremony?" I shook my head weakly. "No, nothing. Just the wine." The doctor frowned. "The wine? But no one else had this reaction. It's very unusual." Alex stepped in, his face etched with concern. "Doctor, are you saying someone might have tampered with her drink?" The doctor hesitated. "It's a possibility we can't ignore. We'll need to run some more tests." I lay there, stunned. Someone had drugged me? On my wedding day? But who? And why? As the doctor left to arrange the tests, Alex came to my side, taking my hand. "Melly, I'm so sorry. I can't believe this is happening." I tried to smile, to reassure him, but my mind was racing. The only thing I could taste was the bitterness of the wine and Mrs. Donovan's harsh words echoing in my head. That night in the hospital, I couldn't sleep. The realization that someone might have deliberately hurt me was terrifying, and the worst part was not knowing who or why. I looked over at Alex, asleep in the chair next to my bed, and felt a wave of sadness. Our wedding day was supposed to be about us, our love. Instead, it ended with me in a hospital bed, surrounded by suspicion and fear. Back home from the hospital, I was a bundle of nerves. The thought that someone had drugged me at my own wedding was like a dark cloud hanging over me. And deep down, I had a gnawing suspicion about who it might be. One evening, I couldn't hold it in any longer. Alex and I were sitting in the living room, the TV playing some show neither of us was watching. I turned to him, my voice shaky. "Alex, I need to talk to you about something serious." He muted the TV, looking concerned. "What's up, Melly?" I took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about what happened at the wedding, and I can't shake off the feeling that your mom might have had something to do with it." Alex's face changed instantly. "What? Melly, that's crazy talk. Why would you even think that?" I could feel my frustration mounting. "Think about it, Alex. All those comments, the way she's always on my case, and then I suddenly fall ill after drinking wine that tasted odd? It's not that far-fetched." Alex stood up, pacing the room. "Melly, you're talking about my mom. She can be tough, sure, but she wouldn't do something like that. You're letting your imagination run wild." I stood up too, my voice rising. "Am I, Alex? Or have you just been turning a blind eye to all the things she's said and done? Can't you see she doesn't like me?" He stopped pacing, looking pained. "Melly, this is serious. Accusing someone of drugging you, that's a big deal. You can't just throw around accusations without proof." I felt tears prick my eyes. "I thought you'd at least consider what I'm saying, but it seems like you'll always take her side." Alex sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's not about taking sides, Melly. It's about being rational. We can't accuse people based on a hunch." I felt a mix of anger and disappointment. "So, what am I supposed to do? Just forget it happened?" He came over, trying to put his arm around me, but I stepped back. "We need to think this through, Melly. Maybe talk to the police again, see if they found anything new." I nodded, though I felt far from convinced. "Fine, we'll talk to them. But Alex, if it turns out I'm right, I don't know what I'll do." That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. My mind kept going back to Mrs. Donovan, her words, her looks. The doubt and fear were like a poison, and I knew I had to find the truth, no matter how painful it might be. A couple of weeks after the hospital incident, we were invited to another family gathering at Mrs. Donovan's house. I was hesitant to go, but Alex insisted it would be good for us to show a united front. As we walked into Mrs. Donovan's house, the atmosphere was tense. I could feel eyes on me, whispering under their breath. Mrs. Donovan greeted us with a smile. "Melly, dear, so glad you could make it," she said, her voice dripping with something that didn't quite sound like sincerity. I forced a smile back. "Thank you for having us, Mrs. Donovan." Dinner was served, and I noticed Mrs. Donovan made a point of bringing me a separate dish. "I made this especially for you, Melly, considering your delicate condition." Her emphasis on delicate didn't go unnoticed. I eyed the dish warily. It looked normal, but after the wedding, I couldn't be sure. Alex, oblivious to my discomfort, started eating his meal. I pushed the food around my plate, my appetite gone. Mrs. Donovan watched me, a hint of a smirk on her face. Not hungry, Melly? I made it just for you. I looked up, meeting her gaze. I'm just not feeling all that well, Mrs. Donovan, but thank you. The room was filled with murmurs and side glances. I could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on me, judging, questioning. Alex, noticing my discomfort, leaned in. You okay? I nodded, but my mind was racing. What if she had done something to the food again? I couldn't take any chances. I whispered to Alex, Can we switch plates? I'm not comfortable eating this. He looked confused, but obliged, swapping our plates. As he reached for a bite of my food, Mrs. Donovan's hand shot out, stopping him. No, Alex, don't! She exclaimed, her voice laced with panic. The room went silent. Everyone's eyes were now on her. Alex looked up, startled. Mom? What's wrong? Mrs. Donovan's face had lost all color. She stammered, looking for an excuse. It's just... That dish is specially made for Melly. It's not to everyone's taste. I stared at her, my suspicions growing stronger. Why not, Mrs. Donovan? What's in it that's so special? She fumbled for words, her usual composure slipping away. It's just a special recipe. The tension in the room was palpable. Alex looked between his mother and me, confusion turning to realization. Mom, what did you do? Mrs. Donovan was silent, her eyes darting around the room. I knew then, without a doubt, that my suspicions were right. There was something in that food, something she didn't want Alex to eat. The room was heavy with tension following the incident with the plates. I could feel everyone's eyes on us, on Mrs. Donovan, who looked like she was caught in a trap. Alex, his face a mix of anger and disbelief, turned to his mother. Mom, what's going on? Why did you freak out about me eating Melly's food? Mrs. Donovan was fumbling for words, her usual poise nowhere to be seen. It's nothing, it was made for Melly, not for you. I couldn't hold back anymore. That's not good enough, Mrs. Donovan. You've been against me from the start. What did you put in my food? The room erupted into murmurs. Mrs. Donovan's eyes darted around, looking for an escape. I didn't put anything in your food, Melly. This is ridiculous. I stood up, my hands trembling. It's not ridiculous. Ever since I started coming to these dinners, I felt sick. And then the wedding. Someone drugged my drink, and now this? It's too much of a coincidence. Alex stood up too, his voice firm. Mom, if you did something to Melly's food, you need to tell us now. This is serious. Mrs. Donovan's face crumpled. I just wanted to protect you, Alex. She's not right for you. She's weak, sickly. I felt a surge of anger. Protect him? By making me sick? By drugging me? The guests were now openly staring, the air thick with accusation and shock. Alex's uncle, who had been silent until now, spoke up. This is a serious accusation, Melly. Do you have any proof? I pointed to my plate. I'm calling the police, and they will give the food prepared by Mrs. Donovan for examination. And then Mrs. Donovan burst into tears. I just wanted the best for my son. I thought if she was out of the picture, he'd find someone better, someone healthier. The confession hung in the air, heavy and damning. Alex looked at his mother, his expression one of utter betrayal. You did this to Melly? My wife? I felt a mix of relief and despair. Relief that the truth was out, but despair at the cost. My relationship with Alex, our place in his family, everything was in shambles. The rest of the evening was a haze. There were arguments, people taking sides, some in disbelief, others in anger. Alex and I left early, the weight of what had happened bearing down on us. As we drove home, neither of us spoke. The silence was oppressive, filled with unasked questions and unspoken fears. What did this mean for us? For our future? The woman who was supposed to be my family had betrayed me in the worst way, and the fallout was something neither Alex nor I were prepared to handle. That night, as I lay in bed, the events of the evening replayed in my mind. Mrs. Donovan's confession, the look of shock on Alex's face, the whispers of the guests. The confrontation had brought the truth to light, but it had also opened a wound that I wasn't sure could ever fully heal. One evening, as Alex and I sat together, the silence between us felt particularly profound. Breaking the stillness, I turned to Alex. "We need to talk about what's next, about the police." He looked at me, his expression solemn yet supportive. "I've been thinking about that too. It's your decision, Melly. I'll back you up, whatever you choose." I mulled over the thought, feeling the weight of the decision on my shoulders. It's just, going to the police feels like opening a Pandora's box. It's not just about exposing what happened, it's about airing family issues in public. He nodded understandingly. "I know it's hard, but remember, you're the one who's been wronged. If you want to pursue this legally, I'm with you." After a pause, I let out a deep breath. "No, I don't think I want to go down that road, but there's something else I've decided." I hesitated, gathering my courage. "I can't see your mother again, Alex. After everything, I can't." Alex's reaction was quiet, contemplative. "I understand. And honestly, I feel the same. After what she did, I can't just carry on as if nothing's happened. I won't see her either." His words were a relief, a validation of my feelings. "It's going to be hard, Alex. She's your mother." He squeezed my hand, firm and reassuring. "I know, but what she did, it's unforgivable. Our relationship, our marriage, comes first." In the days that followed, we both stood by our decision. It was a difficult period, adjusting to this new reality where Mrs. Donovan was no longer a part of our lives. There were moments of doubt, of questioning whether we were too harsh, but we supported each other through them. We started focusing more on ourselves, on rebuilding and strengthening our bond. We made plans for the future, small things to look forward to, like weekend getaways and quiet evenings together. As we moved forward, I realized that this ordeal, as painful as it was, had brought us closer. We had faced a challenge together, one that tested the very foundation of our relationship and had come out stronger.